Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to another week of AL Live here at Align Online. I'm your host this week, Gunnar Rogers. I am one of the content creators and social media guys here at Alignment Leadership. First off, huge shout out to Zach Tinney. He is the mastermind behind the catchy music that you're hearing and the countdown behind setting everything up so that me and our guest on AL Live can have a very smooth experience. So he's behind the scenes, but want to bring his name to the forefront. If you see him in the comments, give him a shout out. He's making this experience for us on the back end so great and making everything on the front end look so pretty and everything goes so smoothly. Another thing before we even get to our first question of the day to have you guys interacting in the comments is we are offering a free 30-minute consulting call with one of our amazing experienced consultants here at Alignment Leadership. There's a link that the Alignment Leadership page is already thrown into the AL Live and into the comments. So if you click that, you can schedule a 30-minute call. Again, it's totally free. This is something that we were charging a pretty high dollar for before all the COVID stuff shook us up pretty good. So we really highly encourage you to take advantage of that 30-minute call. In that call, you can discuss everything from pivoting your own business, how you're leading in a time not just of crisis, but even throughout the recession that is probably going to have a pretty big effect on all of our lives that is coming down the pipe, and also how to lead on the other side of this crisis, of all the changes that are happening. How do we define normal for the people that are following us? How do we live the day-to-day life that comes with post-COVID-19 life? So again, that link is up in the comments, a free 30-minute consulting call with, again, one of our amazing Alignment Leadership consultants. If you don't take advantage of it, I probably will take at least 10 calls. I love talking to these people and I get to work with them. Again, we also encourage everybody to say hi in the comments. Let us know where you're joining us from. If you have any questions throughout our conversation today, please throw those in the comments and we will do our best to get to them. If we do not get to them in this AL Live experience, we go back through those comments every evening after we do an AL Live, so on Tuesday evenings, and we have one or two people from our team go through that, find questions that we didn't answer here on the live, and they'll send you either an email or a direct message here on Facebook. Hey, Walker, how you doing? So glad that you're here, man. Deb, hey, I think she's from Houston. But yeah, so if we don't get to your question, I promise you that we answer it in a direct message, and we might even throw it up on our Instagram or our Twitter and answer it to the public as well, because a lot of times people ask really valuable questions that have really insightful answers from the people we have here at Alignment Leadership that we don't get to here, but we can still offer that in that form. Today, our guest, I am personally and even selfishly very excited for. It is actually my mentor, but also one of my great friends, Nich Hearn. I met him when I was a camper, actually, about 12 years old, at the camp that him and I both worked at, Lady Lodge Youth Camp, out in the South Texas Hill Country, a wonderful place, a beautiful place. And so I met Nich when he was a counselor at that camp, and then actually had the absolute privilege to work with him / just under his guidance as a ropes crew member when he was on full-time staff at that camp, doing a lot of the outdoor education and a lot of the high ropes training and education so that everybody would be safe, because the best time and the best summer is a safe time and a safe summer, as we always said. And then just had the fortune to stay in touch with Nich as he left camp with his lovely wife, Christy, and moved to Austin to be a teacher, and then moved from that to working at MSB School Services, which is owned by our CEO, Chris Muroff, and has held quite a few leadership positions within the organization. He reached out to me over a year ago now and brought up the prospect of working at MSB, and it's been absolutely life-changing to be a part of this company. So I have a lot personally to thank Nich for, but he is going to bring so much value to our conversation today as we talk about self-care and the role that it plays in the way that we lead others. How do we lead ourselves in a way that allows us to lead others well? And that comes with a couple of nuances, a couple of stigmas, especially as culture has taken this idea of self-care and made it more about caring only about yourself. And we just believe that there's a different spin, a different take that we have on that. Yes, it is good and encouraged to take care of ourselves, to exercise different forms of self-care. But what does that look like as far as how do we do it in a way that is selfless? How do we do it in a way that is intentional? How do we do it in a way that gives us permission to do it without shame or guilt, and then allows us to lead those that are following us as best as we possibly can and care for them because we cared for ourselves first. And Nich is bringing a lot of experience as a backcountry guide, as a wilderness guide, as an outdoor educator, and as a teacher that is going to add a lot of value and perspective for us in this conversation today. In a second, we're going to bring Nich on. But first, I do want to go and ask in the comments, let us know what you do to take care of yourself. What are your personal forms of self-care? We would love to know that, not just so we can have some conversation in the comments, but also so that we can also have ideas for ourselves. As we have this conversation, we can go back through and see how other people joining today on AL Live take care of themselves. What are your favorite forms of self-care? So please go ahead and throw those in the comments and have that conversation there. Yeah, hey, Deb and a couple other people joining us today. I think Walker is joining us from Wyoming. That's a really long way away. That's actually one of my favorite parts of AL Live is I've gotten to have so many of these conversations with the people we've had on already in Austin in our offices, and they're always confined in who's there physically. And we've gotten to take these conversations on a much bigger platform, reach a lot more people. So it's such a privilege for us to have people from Wyoming, from Houston, from other states, even down in Australia, people joining us on AL Live. So it's such a privilege to have you guys here. And so love you guys being here. Started using new face wash. Hey, that is actually something that I started doing as well. So no LOL, that is actually a really good way to feel fresh in the morning or just feel like you're a little more clean at night. Aaron, been creating music, having time for prayer and reflection. Aaron Alba on Spotify. He's actually doing one song a month every 6 months. So I can back up that he is making music as a form of self-care. It's really good. So feel free to check that out. All right. I think it is time to bring on Nich. Gonna keep looking at the way you guys like to energize, but I would let Nich, there you are.
Hey Gunnar, how's it going?
Hey man. I am doing so well. I'm so excited to have you on AL Live today. Thank you for taking the time to join us. I know that you got a beautiful daughter at your home right now and a lovely wife you could be spending time with. So thank you for taking some time to join us today.
Well, absolutely, man. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And so I've been kind of hanging out backstage, just watching you, and just want to say thanks for the kind things that you've said about me. It has been it's been a gift to walk, just do life alongside you, and just have conversations. So I'm grateful to be here and hope I can offer at least some different perspective to the conversation.
Dude, it's not just going to be a different perspective. I think it's going to be super valuable. Again, when we were having the conversation last week about who else do we want to bring on to AL Live as we start to build it out a little bit and bring people that are outside of our little team in marketing and sales to be a part of the conversation. The first person I thought of was Nich Hearn because of the conversations we've had about self-care and leadership and how that plays into how we show up, and just thought people need to hear his perspective and hear his experience. So I promise nothing I've said is fabricated. It's all true. I mean, every bit of it from the bottom of my heart. So super excited. Glad I made you blush. So man, first just want to give a little more insight into your background. You were a counselor at Lady Lodge Youth Camp, but also when you were at Texas A&M, you did some outdoor leadership excursion type of work, right?
Yeah. So
Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's kind of started in the outdoor education space. With Lady Lodge Youth Camp, that wasn't the purpose of our summer camp, but because it was in the Frio River Canyon and there was just so much around us, naturally it kind of whetted my appetite for just introducing people to the outdoors, which is something my dad did to me, whether it was camping, fishing, hunting, just loved time in the outdoors and just had such a restorative experience out there. That's how I regain energy, how I recoup in solitude outside or experiencing with other people. So from there, it kind of piqued my interest to pursue more. And I decided to sign up for this program called the National Outdoor Leadership School. So this was after sophomore year of college. And it's all wilderness based. So it was a 28-day backpacking trip that was that was kind of like traveling on the foundation of outdoor ethics, leadership skills, and like an ecological curriculum. Never been backpacking before. I'd been camping, I'd been hiking. I'd never combined the two. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go for it. And I've always been intrigued with this idea of leadership, whether it was being a camp counselor, whether it was different leadership roles I had in high school or college. I just wanted to learn more. And that was a complete watershed experience for me. Here I was, this kid born and raised in Central Texas, flew up to Wyoming in June, which I thought was going to be a really nice summer. But it snowed or hailed or sleeted on us 22 out of the 28 days that we were out on trail. And it really broke me and everybody else in that experience. And so while I was going through that, just this gauntlet of a time, I was led by these 3 instructors who taught us the importance of self-care. And so in NOLS, they call it expedition behavior, about how to selflessly care for the people on your trip. But one of the keystones of expedition behavior is taking care of yourself first. Because in a backcountry situation, if somebody's declining, it's gonna affect everybody. If I'm not ready, prepared to show up for that day, to carry my own weight, literally on my back, or to cook, or to clean, or to be available for some sort of emergency, that's really going to affect other people. And so that's kind of where I was really. I think that's kind of where I cut my teeth on this idea of self-care. Because prior to that, I'd really valued self-sufficiency and trying to be, able to tough it out, whether it was pain, physical or emotional. And honestly, that's part of the motivation of going on NOLS, is that I wanted to prove to myself and to others that I could grit this thing out. But I couldn't have been more wrong. Because it totally broke me in a way that made me realize self-care was so necessary in this setting that I couldn't have gotten by without it. And some of that was personal self-care, and some of that was just the care that we gave each other within that community, which is so vital. So it was really kind of rocked my world in a way, and was not what I expected, but was so much better than even what I was hoping for.
Yeah, and so with that, I want to dive into that a little bit deeper. So with that self-care piece and just your perception of what leadership is before you went into NOLS, and then what it was once you left, just can you walk us through what Nich Hearn thought leadership was and thought being selfless was when he started in June, and then what you came out on the other side really believing leadership is and began to pursue, with that self-care piece being a part of the foundation?
Absolutely. So I think, if I said that the story ended on June 28th, 2009, I'd be lying to you and everybody. It's an ongoing journey. And I find myself, even as I'm talking, I think the message is more for me than anybody else, because I need to be reminded of what it means to be selfless and what it means to care for yourself. So the journey is continuing, the story is going on. But one thing that instilled in me, I walked into that experience thinking leadership was, which I value servant leadership a ton. I value leaders. I was shown this through my faith, through different leaders that I had followed, through the way my parents led me and raised me. I think servant leadership is something I really valued, and I still do. But when I walked into that experience in June, I was imagining, I think I had this hero complex of taking a bullet for somebody, or giving them the shirt off my back, or doing something that was going to be just noteworthy. How can I lay down my life in the most intense way for somebody? And what I realized was, as I was going through this, our instructors just kept telling us, yeah, you're going to care for the group. And this is about living together in the wilderness as a community. But it starts with yourself, because you're never going to be prepared to care for anybody else if you are just on the edge of breaking, or on a physical, have some physical ailment. Some of the most common evacuations from the backcountry, your head goes to like a river crossing drowning or bear attack. It's blisters and sunburn. Those are the most common evacuations. And so if you're not taking care of your feet, if you're not putting sunscreen on, you are not going to be able to stay out there. And so we always think that it's going to be this big, bad, gnarly thing, but it's just the basics of taking care of ourselves. So that was one side of it. And then as another component of our education, we learned wilderness medicine or wilderness first aid. And one of the tenets of wilderness first aid is the scene assessment. The first thing you do when you see somebody get hurt or when you come up on somebody who's been injured, and the first rule in all of the reputable wilderness first aid organizations in North America, the first rule is asking yourself, is the scene safe? And to remember that, there's like the 5 steps of scene assessment. And number 1 is reminding yourself, who is number 1? And you have to come in with this perspective that in this situation, I'm number 1. I have to care for myself and think about my safety even before I go in and start helping somebody else who's in a critical situation. Because as a leader in the backcountry, you've got to realize that if you compromise your own safety, it's not only your patient that you're harming, but it's the whole group you're with. And so it was just really interesting as I'm thinking, like, how can I, run in front of a train for somebody or give the shirt off my own back? This whole concept of how do you keep yourself safe and in a good place mentally and physically so that you can make sound judgment, so that you can have the ability to carry out that judgment and decision-making when the time comes to really serve somebody. So for me, that was the beginning of this paradigm shift of it's still selfless. I don't think I'm being self-indulgent, but I'm realizing that it's these really basic ways to just make sure that I'm okay so that I'm fit for when that opportunity presents itself.
For sure. And was there then, but even now, is there tension in the way that, that original idea of what servant leadership is and this idea of, we ascribe a lot of valor and honor to, I would take a bullet for somebody. I would jump in front of a car for somebody. I would risk my life to save somebody else. And there's very much a lot of value in that. But did that almost rub against this new idea of, but I have to come first before I can even jump in front of that car, or I have to assess and evaluate how I can show up before I show up? Like, what was that tension like when that paradigm shift really started? And then what is that tension like even now at home when you're working from home at a time like this and you have a young daughter and a wife and a job to do, but you also have Nick that you also have to take care of. So what was that tension like when you were at Knowles? Well, how does that look today?
Man, that's a really good question. I think that coming back from my experience in Knowles and still being just a young single guy who was, trying to prove himself in some ways and still had these, like, the grips of just trying to be self-sufficient and tough enough, there was a huge tension in that, absolutely huge tension, because I still wanted to be seen as the guy who could save the day or the guy who could, fix anything or just, give the shirt off his back. And I still do value that kind of leadership. You see stories all over the world right now of doctors and frontline workers and first responders who every single day are putting others before themselves, literally giving the shirt off their back, literally exposing themselves to something that is invisible and fatal for the service of others. And so I think now is the time and the place for those people to figuratively step in front of the bullet or in front of the train. I have so much respect for what they're doing. What I realize, though, is that for every person in every situation, there's a time and a place for that. But then there's also this time and a place where you need to be maybe approach the situation differently. For me right now, I'm not, if I saw a neighbor, getting attacked outside, 100% go in, step in front of them in that harm. But if you're in the backcountry and you've got 14 other people standing behind you who need to be led and wouldn't be led well if you got injured, that's the difference. And so I think really as far as servant leadership goes, or even responding in crisis, is there's just so many different ways to do it. There's so many situations. And so in some of those, I really do think giving the shirt off your back is the best way. I think it just broadened my horizons and really gave me perspective on the fact that there's so many different ways to do it, that I can't look at the way somebody else is helping and just have some moral high ground on my way is the right way. There's just all sorts of different. And the comment about how do I do that now as a husband and a father is a huge challenge for me, because there were times in my life where I had way more time and availability and flexibility with my schedule, to where if somebody picked up the phone and said, "Hey, I really need to talk right now," I could put away my entire evening and just hash things out, talk, listen, and really serve in the way that I would like to. But I have to realize that there's two other people that I feel are my responsibility, not because they can't take care of themselves, although Marin can't take care of herself. But there's two other people.
Dude, she's almost 2. She should be able to do this by now.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, all we have to do is handle sharp knife. But she's cooking, cleaning, all that good stuff.
Yeah, she's texting. She's fine.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. For another day. So I think I have to also, as I aspire to the type of servant leader I want to be, I've got to create different boundaries every day, because there are people who I believe it is my purpose every single day to show up and give of myself, so that they can be well, which also puts more tax and more burden on myself, in which I need to care for myself in different ways. So it's man, that's why I say the story continues to go on. The journey is endless, because with each turn of my life, I would say really great things have been happening ever since 2009. It's all been getting better and better. With each good new thing in life, it just totally throws a wrench in the system, and I've got to relearn this idea of what it means to lead. I feel like I thought when I graduated or achieved this certain success, that I would just be the alumni in life that had so much wisdom. And I find that like every year I'm the freshman again who's just learning learning this brand new system. So it's been challenging, but it's also a worthy challenge to be a part of.
Heck yeah. Well, I have so many questions, but I know that we already have a few questions in the comments. So I'm just going to ask one more as part of our conversation and get to a few of the questions in the comments. Again, if you have any questions, all those of you joining us from across the country here at AL Live, throw them in the comments. We're going to get to as many as we can right now, and any that we miss, I promise you'll have an answer in your inbox or even on our social media platforms within the next 24 hours. So Nick, part of what I was thinking as you were talking, and man, everything you've given us is so freaking valuable already. So I just love this conversation so much. Something that I think of, and part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you and have valued our conversations about it in the past, is it seems like there's two ends of the spectrum that are pretty extreme when it comes to self-care and how it informs the way we show up. There's the one extreme of you can't do self-care, like to be selfless, to lead, is to neglect any need of your own, and is to never take care of yourself, die to yourself, and serve others, to selflessly serve others. There's that realm, and then there's the other end that is just completely self-indulgent. And if I'm just always taking care of myself and all of my needs are met, then my life will be good and everyone else can hop on or hop off that train. It's almost, and I think we have both extremes in our culture right now. And so in your own experience, why do you think this is something that's so hard for us to achieve? Because I think for me, when I go to exercise some form of self-care, so that with the intent to show up well for my lovely wife or for my coworkers, or just to not be a really crappy version of myself, there's this guilt, or there's sometimes this shame around, like, well, what you're doing is pretty selfish right now. And so why do you think this is something that's really hard for us to achieve?
Man, that's $1 million question. I think we
aren't they all?
Yeah, true. I think we're all inherently pretty selfish. And so I think that draws us to that side of the spectrum that says, just, look out for number one. In
Yeah.
every situation in life, you're assessing the scene and saying, I'm number one, even if sometimes you're not supposed to be. And so I think that I find that in my own life too. Ask my wife, as we learn how to work together.
Hey,
Yeah,
Chrissy, put it in the comments.
yeah, yeah. She could light up a comment board on my selfish tendencies,
Yeah.
and marriage and parenthood. But then also, like I mentioned, there was this. I've also been pulled to the other spectrum of like self-denial and stoicism, just thinking that I needed to deny myself and all the pains, all the desires, and somehow that was going to make me more able to help people. And neither one of those worked. And so in my experience, I'm sure there's libraries of books on this topic. There's probably a million blogs you could follow. And so I don't have any definitive truth necessarily, but in my experience, there've been two things, kind of litmus tests to me deciding whether or not I'm hitting the mark or I'm somewhere close. And so I think one of those is figuring out why you're doing the things you do. And so you can be extremely extravagant with the way you care for yourself, or it can be extremely simple. But either one of those could be leaning towards self-indulgence if it is maybe you're using whatever activity or whatever ritual you have to escape something, to deny people, to ignore people, to insulate yourself. But then you can also you can go off on the other end with that. And so I think one is in these. I think that's the reason that I love wilderness leadership so much, is it forces you into situations where you have to pour yourself out so often that you have to be. Self-care doesn't become laziness; it becomes discipline. And so you realize, hey, I've done all of these things as a guide. From the time I wake up, from the time I go to sleep, I'm checking on people's feet. I'm making sure they've got sunscreen. I'm making sure they're fed. I'm making sure that they're layering properly so they don't get hypothermia. And so at any moment that I get of margin in the day, I'm pursuing solitude. I'm pursuing reading or text that's going to encourage me and remind me of my value. I'm pursuing a conversation with my guide partner just to let them know how exhausted I am, or just a belly laugh with somebody is one of the most effective ways of self-care in my experience. And so I think that's the way, or the reason that outdoor leadership was this healthy introduction to self-care, was because it forced you to pour yourself out so much that self-care becomes this highly disciplined thing that you have to work really hard just to keep up with all of the stuff that you're pouring out. In times of my life where I've slipped into sloth or laziness is when I find myself more self-indulgent. I'm not refueling my ability to pour out. I'm letting the day drain away, and I'm wasting my time. I think that feeling of regret of the time you've wasted, the opportunities to serve people is kind of been my personal litmus test. But at the same time, I think there's nothing that can serve you better than community, because even in those times when I pridefully say I've got my own litmus test and I can tell you when I'm being self-indulgent versus selfless, my true north gets out of whack all the time. So sometimes I'll convince myself that I'm doing something that's really actually for the betterment of my family or for my friends, people I need to show up for, and really that's just complete BS, and I'm just lying to myself. And so I think having a group of friends that you trust, that you have that you can have some common agreement on, but really I think these people need to know who you are today and who you want to be, because they're going to help you get there. And sometimes that means affirming the path you're on, and sometimes that means they lovingly tell you, hey, this is one of those times where you're totally lying to yourself, and I think that you're it's just all about Nick right now, which is really I even don't take criticism that well, but it's every time something like that has happened, it's been a growing experience. It's been really helpful.
That's awesome, man. I love some of these. Really, all that was amazing, but what stuck out a lot was this idea of self-care as a discipline, not as either Because to me, I think in my growing experience so far, I used to go to those either self-indulgent or those selfish behaviors as a form of self-care more because I was at the end of my rope or was finally just so empty and so burnt out that I'm trying to think of words that aren't cuss words. By golly, I'm gonna go do what I want to do. No one's gonna come with me. I'm number one now. Um, and have never heard it in those words before, but just really realizing it's those small daily practices of self care that are what allow us to show up well. It is making sure your feet are taken care of and putting on sunscreen. That was another thing I loved earlier about it's the blisters and the sunburns that are usually what get people in trouble, not a bear attack or drowning in a river. And so if anyone has a note and pen or anything, please write that down. As far as self care is a discipline, it's not a form of laziness. It's not, we don't have to have 5-day retreats every 2 years to actually reset and be ourselves again. It can be 5 minutes of reading something encouraging or having that belly aching laughter, which, by the way, if no one has ever seen Nich Hearn have belly aching laughter, it is adorable. I highly recommend it if you ever have the chance. Dude, selfishly, I want to ask so many more questions of my own, but we got questions in the comments that I would definitely love to get to. So, Deb Arnold, she asks, what is one piece of advice you would give your future self when it comes to self care?
Deb, hey, I'm glad you're joining us. It's good to hear from you. Future self, gosh, I think it's way easier to talk to my past self because I realized how foolish that Nick was, and so I I think that something I can tell my present self, and I think something I'm working on right now, which let's pretend this is to my future self because I'm sure I'm going to need to hear it then too. But I think that it's as I navigate this spectrum of selflessness to self-indulgence, I tend to be really really critical when I realize that I've gone off one side, or when I realize that I'm not giving to those that I love and that I care for enough. I just get really really critical, and then that causes me to even retreat further and to kind of become reclusive because I'm afraid of failing. I'm afraid of failing those people. I'm afraid that my friends or my family, my loved ones will hold me accountable to being too selfish or to giving too much. And so I think that what I'm getting at is my present and future self needs to realize that I need more grace from myself, not from those around me. I think they do a really good job at it, but I just need to be more forgiving to myself and just kinder, honestly.
Which I think it's interesting that when it comes to even grace, but also the permission to take care of ourselves, we're really quick to give that permission to other people. We're really good at giving grace to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so in your own experience so far, why is it so hard for you to give yourself that same permission or that same grace you would give Chrissy or you would give me when I'm calling you on the phone, trying to hash stuff out that really just takes you saying, hey, you're being selfish, going around and think about it for a minute, then you're going to be fine. So why is it so hard for you yourself to like give yourself that grace and that permission?
Yeah, I think once I get my my license as a professional counselor, I'll be able to answer it more fully. But I think that I have this need to feel like I belong. I have this need to feel useful. I have this need to feel loved, and I think that the false voice in my head tells me that I'm not those things. And so when I hear that voice, I compensate by doing more, serving more, giving myself less grace, giving myself less margin. Or sometimes it just kind of has this opposite effect, and I just go full on into selfishness mode and retreat. And so I think it's honestly that voice deep down that is speaking lies. And so while I say this, and like I said earlier, a lot of this stuff is just what I need to hear more than anybody else, is that because when I'm out of center with who I am, and when I don't understand my own value, that's when I have these tendencies to not give myself grace, to not ask for grace, to not ask for permission to, to rest more, or to step back a little bit. So I really just think it's kind of the voice of the imposter that's inside.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's coming into this AL Live today. One thing I definitely want people to walk away with is the truth that you are worthy of the exact same grace that you would give your best friend or your coworkers or your loved ones. You have every right to the same permission that you would give others to take care of themselves so that they can show up well. You have every right to lead yourself the same way you would encourage other people to, so that you can lead others well. So again, pen and paper, definitely write that down. Also, Nick, don't forget, if you need to hear all this later, like you said, we have a replay that we post on our Facebook and we send on our email list. Shameless plug, subscribe.
Absolutely.
All right, so another question we have from Aaron Alba. How did you transition from wanting to help people from the desire of being the hero to the desire of being selfless? So I think the question there is, how did you transition from wanting to serve people, for being known as someone who serves people, to just simply out of who Nick is, serving people?
Yeah, I think I don't know if I'm really great at like leading somebody else through that. I do my best to lead by example, and so I think what I've known that's true about me is that now that I've realized that there's a different antidote for each situation, and it's not just always being the hero or doing something that's going to be noticed. I started in small ways. Every time there was an opportunity to serve, I would have to check myself. Why am I doing this? Why am I responding in this way? Is this wise, or is this what is going to get Nick more praise or attention or affirmation, or is this service going to be noticed more?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that what I've realized is now, I think some of those who knew me when I was 20, 22 years old, probably in some ways, and I think honestly, this has been, just to be, lay it all bare, this has been the hardest part of the transition, is I received so much praise and affirmation for the way that I served in that time, that now I think some people look at my life and think he's changed. He's become more selfish, or he's just not the same guy he used to be, because I have different boundaries and I have a different approach to service. Because when you've been the guy trying to be the hero, especially in a tight-knit community that's kind of has this like rhythm of regathering, like I had in one of my full-time roles at Lady Lodge Youth Camp. When you show up and you work years and years to build yourself as this person who is kind of the hero, and then you start disengaging from that, not everybody's going to understand. And so that was to me when I realized more fully what dying to yourself meant. It wasn't about just being the hero, doing the service that's going to get you attention. It's doing the small and quiet things in ways that sometimes the people you're serving won't even recognize, because it's not in the way that you traditionally did it. And so I don't know if that answers your question, Aaron. That's been my journey with it, and kind of my experience. And it's been a long process, and it's been really hard too. So if I'm going to guide somebody in that, I would say be true to yourself and have endurance. Because if you are looking for that affirmation as fuel for the journey, then it's going to be a path to burnout. I think that's where your community comes in. If they know what you're trying to do and the journey that you're on, they're the ones that are going to be able to keep you going.
Mm-hmm. I think that I have a Post-it note over there on my wife and I put Post-it notes on all over our apartment. Just if we read something or hear something, we'll write it down. But that just totally is relevant to this quote. It says, if you rise on the praise of man, you will fall on the praise of man. And encouragement is great, and it's so necessary for us to call out the soft skills and encourage the unique value that everyone brings to the table. But also, I think even in that self-care piece of when we step back from the crowd, when we are taking care of ourselves, coming back to the truth of you would do what you're doing, or you would lead the way you lead. You would care for people the way you care because of who you are, not because of who you're being told you are or who you think you're supposed to be based on that praise. So I really hope you know there's a lot of value in what you just said, even if you don't feel like you answered the question directly. You did, but also there's just so much in what you just said, and I can't wait to watch the replay and pull a lot of quotes out of that for our Twitter. Follow us on Twitter. Another shameless plug, Align, Lead, Thrive. So another question we have here is, how have you practiced personal self-care to better serve your team or organization in your current role?
Yeah, so that's another good question. So I'm fairly new to my role right now. I've been in second week of work from home or shelter in place here in Austin is when I joined this team. So I'm very new. I think honestly the best thing that I can do in my role is just to be a learner. I think the last thing our team needs, who is full of just wise, capable, passionate people, is for somebody just to come in and throw themselves around like a bull in a china shop and like self-promote, be out of this insecurity of wanting to belong. I think best thing I can do is speak when I feel it's my time to speak, but just listen, just learn, get to know everybody. Luckily, I knew most of the people on my new team and worked with them in other capacities, but just get to know who they are, who they really are, and just build community.
Heck yeah. And I think that actually flows really well to another question we have from Josh Boyer. Hey, Josh, he asked, what lessons from wilderness guiding that you shared at the beginning do you feel most apply to a setting of leading a team of adults that are also not in the wilderness?
That are also not in the wilderness, yeah. I think when Gunnar and I were prepping for this conversation, I have thought about my time at Knowles, guiding for Young Life Wilderness Ranch, for Way Forward Adventures, pretty much every day. And so I think the thing that, I don't know if there is one thing. It's really hard to boil it down to one. But I think the power of community, the power of knowing people, of hearing their story and understanding their perspective is so important. That's something that I watched on trail happen as we would sit around, whether it was campfire or throw up a tarp and have some lunch in the afternoon sun, just allowing for everybody in the group to share their life story, and for the sake of just knowing really who they are and allowing themselves to be known. I think that's the most important thing a team can have. And so for me, I think creating a space for people to feel really known, not just for who or what they can do in their job or why they're working, but just be able to share everything they want people to know about them. And I think that really is cohesive in a team. And when crisis happens or when frustration comes up, which inevitably it will, we can look past our assumptions and really see who this person is. And I think that just allows for so much more understanding and grace. And even I've found that a team is more willing to work together when they feel that they know each other better. So I think that's the thing I've learned the most.
Heck yeah. And I have a question from Ian I want to get to, but just that made me think really quick, just a lighthearted question really quick. What has been harder to lead, a classroom of 8th graders, a backpacking group of 17, 18-year-old boys, or a team of 5 to 10, 20, 30, 40-year-olds?
Man, they all have their unique challenges, but to all my educators out there, I want to say a group of 32, 13 to 15-year-olds has been the biggest challenge. So to all my educators out there who are just making it happen in this season right now, my heart goes out to you. Whether you were in the classroom or trying to do Zoom, Microsoft Teams, you are giving of yourself. So I hope you're also finding ways to pour back into yourself, because you guys are killing it. I've got a special place in my heart for teachers, because I've experienced some really intense situations in the the corporate work setting, and also in the middle of the wilderness. But never have I been in such a hostile environment than in an 8th grade science class.
I think I saw that answer coming, but I just had to affirm it both for myself and I think everybody listening.
Absolutely.
So Ian asked, how do you avoid feeling guilty when you are doing something for you? That feeling usually prevents me from actually doing something for myself because I never want to be viewed as selfish or inconsiderate.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that goes on, for me, in my experience, it goes back to the community. Whether it's my community is Chrissy and Marin here at home, or whether it's my team at work, or whether it's my family, like my sister and mom and dad who I grew up with. I think if we voice our needs and we say, hey, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I want to do to solve it, and here's what I think it's going to come out of it. Here's how much time it's going to take. Sometimes here's my budget. Here's how much money it's going to take, because that's a relevant thing in Family Matters. Then they can affirm that. And I think once that person who your teammate is, whether it's at work, at home, whatever context, once they say, I see you, I hear what you need, go for it, that just melts away any guilt you're going to feel, because it's never this isolated, selfish thing. It's been affirmed by your community. And so I think, in my experience, that's the best way, because there have been times when I've cared for myself and the whole time I'm thinking, oh man, she's going to be upset, or this isn't going to help her. But the times when she's really affirmed, hey, I absolutely do want you to go take this time or spend this money or go be away for X amount of hours or days or whatever it is, then it's pure joy. And it's just, instead of avoiding going, or the whole time I'm just stressed, I just get to soak in the care that I've created the space for.
I love how much you've pointed to community throughout this whole conversation. And so, just as a parting question, because this is an online community, we formed it to be a community for leaders to be equipped and encouraged for us to get to do AL Live and to help people and equip people to align their teams and align toward their own purpose and to their own mission, which is a big piece of the free 30-minute consulting call that you can schedule with the link that we've already thrown in the comments. And so just wanted to ask, as a parting question, why is it that community has shaped who you are, and honestly just your view of leadership, and played such a big role in who Nich Hearn is today? And even who are some of those people that have been in that community, that have called out your soft skills, that have called out your value, who have challenged you to grow?
Gosh, yeah. I think for me, it draws towards community because of my experience. I think it's a tenet of my faith to pursue community and pursue truth in a community. The power of numbers in affirming a belief, or affirming, just affirming decisions. I think that's kind of been drilled in for a long time, but it wasn't until I experienced that firsthand. And so some people along the way for me that have poured into me. I think every single one of my mentors, whether they were instructor while I was a student or a boss, my Knowles instructors, Patsy Cott, Jason Curtin when I was at the A&M Outdoor Adventure Center, Eric Silvius and Trey Toll in my time at the HEB Family Foundation. My college roommates they're living with them for 3 years is some of the most authentic community I've experienced. And gosh, my parents, my mother and father-in-law, Chrissy, last but not least, I think those people it's so important to just to be involved in that community, because by ourselves, I think it's really hard to find our direction, to understand if where we're going is where we're actually need to be going. To throw in a navigational analogy, our GPS systems that we use every day, whether we're in the backcountry, whether we're trying to go to Starbucks or Coffee and Crisp to get our cup of Joe, there needs to be more than one reference point in order to have any semblance of accuracy. So in GPS, there needs to be at least 3, but oftentimes there's way more. And so just like us, we can't, knowing our own location but not referencing it to other places, we can't be confident that we're going in the direction we want to go and becoming the person that we want to be, it takes far more reference points or waypoints, in this case, people, to really affirm whether we're going in the right spot or whether we need to figure out a different direction. Because I think we oftentimes convince ourselves that we're going to find our own way. In my experience, that has only led to failure, to loneliness, and literally being lost in the middle of a hailstorm in the wilderness of Wyoming. Can't feel your hands or feet, and it's not a good place to be. So I think there's just my practical experience has always pushed me towards community.
I love that. Also, I'm sure that being lost in a hailstorm, frozen hands and feet, was a really intense, hard experience. But it's interesting to think that even emotionally, or even just not in the wilderness, but in our daily life, if we try and make our own way without community, in a lot of ways, we end up worse than if we were in a hailstorm in Wyoming, freezing hands and feet. And so I think that's such a cool way to point to how necessary and how just amazing community is, and how it reminds us of who we are, and it gives us the opportunity to live a vibrant, fulfilled life, and we can't do that alone. And I mean, Nick, you have been one of my mentors and will always be, and have been a huge part of my community. If the tables were turning, you asked who's been a part of that community, you would be one of the people at the very top of that list. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure that you would love to go hang out with Marin for a little bit before your next meeting. So just want to go ahead and give you the permission to go do that. And again, thank you for your time today. Everybody that's joined us today, thank you for your time. I know that there are a lot of other ways that you could spend it. So we are so thankful that you choose to spend it with us here at Align Online and doing AL Live. Meet us again next week. We will be doing this for the foreseeable future every Tuesday at 12 p.m., barring any decisions to make it a different time. But until then, Tuesdays at 12 p.m., AL Live, you are not going to want to miss who we have next week and the conversation that we'll be having. You'll get more information on that throughout the week. Again, if you want to continue this conversation, have more guidance on self-care and how it informs how we show up and who we show up as, schedule a 30-minute consulting call. That is something that we can talk about, something we can walk you through and give you practical advice on how to take care of yourself, how to lead yourself so you can lead others. And be on the lookout for a little bit more content based on this conversation throughout the week. Invite other people you know to be a part of our community. We want to grow with you. We want to learn with you. We want to fail with you, and we want to learn from it. And again, thank you so much for being a part of Align Online, where we want to equip and encourage one another. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.